The California sun bore down mercilessly on Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego as Emily Parker stepped off the bus, her worn duffel bag clutched tightly against her chest. The heat was suffocating, thick and oppressive, wrapping around her like a wool blanket in summer. She could already feel sweat forming at the back of her neck, dampening the collar of her civilian T-shirt. Around her, dozens of other recruits moved with varying degrees of confidence, some striding forward with squared shoulders, others shuffling nervously like herself. But Emily felt particularly small, particularly out of place. At 5'3" and barely 110 pounds, she knew exactly how she looked among these would-be Marines. Her frame was slight, almost delicate, and her round face still carried traces of teenage softness despite her 20 years. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that seemed too neat, too civilian. Green eyes that darted around uncertainly, taking in the imposing buildings, the shouting drill instructors, the organized chaos of reception day. Move it! Form up on the yellow footprints. A drill instructor's voice cut through the air like a whip crack, and Emily jumped, nearly dropping her bag. She hurried toward the painted footprints on the concrete, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was a mistake, whispered a voice in her head. You don't belong here. You're not strong enough, not tough enough, not brave enough. But she forced herself to keep moving, to place her feet on those yellow marks worn smooth by thousands of recruits before her. As she stood there, trying to mirror the rigid posture of the others, she became aware of eyes on her. Not just the drill instructors. That was expected. But other recruits. She could hear whispered comments, could feel their assessment of her like a physical weight. Did they start accepting middle schoolers? Someone muttered behind her, followed by quiet snickering. She looks like she's about to cry already. Another voice added, not quite low enough. Emily's face burned. She kept her eyes forward, jaw clenched, fighting the sting of tears that threatened to prove them right. She wouldn't cry. She couldn't. Not on the first day. Not in the first hour. Her father hadn't raised a quitter, even if he wasn't here to see her now. The thought of her father sent a sharp pang through her chest. Captain James Parker, United States Marine Corps, killed in action in Afghanistan when Emily was only 12. 8 years had passed, but the grief still felt fresh sometimes, catching her off guard in quiet moments. She'd carried his memory with her every day since then, and now she was here, trying to walk in his footsteps, trying to honor his legacy. Her hand instinctively moved to touch her backpack, where a Silver Star medal hung on a small chain she'd attached to the zipper, a talisman, a reminder of why she was doing this. The medal was tarnished now, the ribbon faded, but to Emily, it was more precious than gold. Eyes forward, recruit, a drill instructor barked, and Emily snapped her gaze back to attention, her hand falling to her side. The next several hours blurred together in a chaos of paperwork, medical examinations, and constant movement from one station to another. They were stripped of their civilian clothes, their personal items confiscated and stored, their hair cut to regulation length. Emily watched her blonde ponytail fall to the floor with a detached sort of numbness. It was just hair. It would grow back. But somehow, seeing it lying there made everything feel more real, more permanent. By late afternoon, they were issued their uniforms and assigned to platoons. Emily found herself in 3rd Battalion, Delta Company, Platoon 3086. The other recruits in her platoon eyed each other warily, everyone sizing everyone else up, looking for allies or identifying threats. Emily tried to make herself as inconspicuous as possible, but her size made that difficult. Parker, front and center. Senior drill instructor staff Sergeant Morrison bellowed, his voice carrying across the squad bay with the force of thunder. Emily's stomach dropped. She stepped forward quickly, moving to stand before the drill instructor, her eyes fixed on the wall behind him as she'd been instructed. Morrison was a mountain of a man, 6'4" with shoulders that seemed to span the width of a doorway. His dark eyes were hard, assessing, missing nothing. He circled her slowly, like a shark examining potential prey. "Parker," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you look like a strong wind could knock you over. What makes you think you can be a Marine?" "Sir, this recruit believes she has the determination and dedication required, sir." Emily responded, her voice shakier than she would have liked. Morrison snorted. Determination. Dedication. He drew out the words mockingly. Let me tell you something, Parker. This isn't some after-school program. This isn't a place for little girls playing dress-up. Marines fight. Marines bleed. Marines die. And right now, looking at you, all I see is liability. Dead weight. That's going to get someone killed. Each word landed like a physical blow. Emily felt her face burning, felt the eyes of every recruit in the squad bay on her, felt the weight of her inadequacy pressing down on her shoulders. But she kept her eyes forward, kept her mouth shut, accepting the verbal assault as she knew she must. Do you understand what I'm saying, Parker? Morrison leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. Sir, yes, sir. Good. Then prove me wrong. Or get out before you waste my time. He stepped back, dismissing her with a jerk of his head. Emily returned to her place in formation, her legs trembling slightly. Around her, she could feel the judgment of her fellow recruits. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical, but most just looked relieved that they hadn't been the target of Morrison's attention. That night, lying in her rack, the narrow bunk that would be her bed for the next 13 weeks, Emily stared at the ceiling and questioned everything. The physical exhaustion was immense. Her body ached from the constant movement, the exercises, the stress positions they'd been forced to hold. But it was the emotional toll that threatened to break her. The mockery, the doubt, the constant assault on her worth and capabilities. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a scared little girl who had no business being here. Maybe her dream of honoring her father's memory was just that, a dream, foolish and unattainable. But then she thought of her father, of the stories her mother had told her, how he'd been underestimated too at first, how he'd been a scrawny kid from a small town in Nebraska, dismissed by some as too small, too quiet, too gentle. But he'd proven himself over and over through sheer determination and heart. He'd earned the respect of his men, earned his rank, earned that silver star through an act of incredible bravery that had saved 6 Marines' lives at the cost of nearly losing his own. Emily closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would not quit. She would not give them the satisfaction of being right about her. She would prove that size didn't determine strength, that fear didn't equal weakness, that being her father's daughter meant something. Tomorrow would be harder. Every day would be harder. But she would face it. She had to. 3 weeks into training, and Emily felt like she was drowning. Every morning began at 0500 with the harsh clang of a trash can being thrown down the center of the squad bay, followed by drill instructors screaming at them to get up, get moving, get outside. Every day was a relentless cycle of physical training, drill practice, classroom instruction, and constant correction. Every night, she collapsed into her rack with muscles screaming and a mind foggy with exhaustion. But the physical challenges, as brutal as they were, weren't what threatened to break her. It was the isolation, the mockery, the constant reminder that she didn't belong. Pick up the pace, Parker. Staff Sergeant Morrison shouted as they ran the obstacle course for what felt like the 100th time. Emily was pulling herself over a wall, her arms shaking with effort, sweat pouring down her face. She made it over, but barely, landing hard on the other side and stumbling forward. Behind her, she could hear other recruits muttering. Dead weight, someone said. She's holding us back, another added. They weren't wrong. She was consistently one of the slowest in platoon, struggling with obstacles that others cleared easily. The rope climb was her nemesis. She simply didn't have the upper body strength to haul herself up efficiently. The runs left her gasping and dizzy. Even the seemingly simple task of carrying her rifle and pack for miles left her lagging behind. The other recruits had started avoiding her. In training, you succeeded or failed as a team, and when one person consistently struggled, it affected everyone's scores, everyone's evaluations. Emily had become a pariah, the weak link that no one wanted to be associated with. She tried harder. She woke up earlier than required, using the extra minutes to do additional push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups on the bar outside the squad bay. She skipped portions of her already meager meals to save time for extra practice. She pushed herself until her vision swam and her hands shook, but it never seemed to be enough. The gap between her and the others remained a chasm. On a particularly brutal Thursday morning, with gray clouds hanging low and threatening rain, the platoon was running a timed 3-mile course. Emily had started strong, determined to keep up, but by the second mile, her lungs were burning, her legs felt like lead, and she'd fallen far behind the main group. "Move, Parker." Sergeant Lopez, one of the other drill instructors, ran alongside her. "My grandmother could beat your time, and she's been dead for 5 years. Emily tried to respond, to push faster, but her body wasn't cooperating. Her vision was narrowing, dark spots dancing at the edges. Her breath came in ragged gasps that didn't seem to bring enough oxygen. The world tilted slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself before she fell completely. "Walk it off," Lopez commanded, but his voice seemed to come from far away. Emily made it to the finish line last, well after everyone else had completed the run and begun their cool-down stretches. Her time was abysmal, and she knew it. As she bent over, hands on her knees, trying desperately to catch her breath, she heard the comments around her. "Pathetic. Why is she even here? She's going to get us all recycled." That last comment hit hard. Being recycled meant starting over with a new platoon, losing weeks of progress. The thought of being responsible for that happening to these recruits, even ones who mocked her, made Emily's stomach churn with guilt and shame. Later that afternoon, during a rare moment of downtime, Emily sat on her footlocker, carefully polishing her boots. Her hands moved mechanically, applying the polish in small circles, buffing it to a shine. It was meditative work, one of the few moments of peace she got. Her backpack hung on the post of her rack nearby, her father's silver star catching the overhead fluorescent light. "Hey, Parker." The voice made her look up. It was Recruit Martinez, a tall, muscular woman from Texas who'd been one of the top performers in the platoon. Emily had heard her laughing at some of the jokes made at Emily's expense. "You really think you can make it through this?" Emily set down her boot carefully, meeting Martinez's eyes. "I'm going to try." Trying isn't enough here. Martinez crossed her arms. "Look, I don't mean to be harsh, but you're struggling. Bad. And when you struggle, we all suffer for it. Have you thought about maybe this just isn't for you?" The words, delivered almost kindly, hurt worse than the outright mockery. Emily felt something crack inside her chest. "This is exactly for me," she said quietly. "My father was a Marine. This is where I'm supposed to be." Martinez's expression softened slightly, but skepticism remained in her eyes. Having a Marine dad doesn't make you a Marine. You have to earn it. And right now, she shook her head. Right now, you're not earning it. You're just suffering through it. After Martinez walked away, Emily sat frozen, her father's metal swimming in her vision as tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. She quickly wiped them away, looking around to make sure no one had seen, but the damage was done. The doubt that had been a whisper in her mind had become a roar. That night, lying awake while the rest of the platoon slept, Emily seriously considered quitting for the first time. There was no shame in it, she told herself. Plenty of recruits dropped out. It didn't mean you were weak or worthless. It just meant this particular path wasn't for you. She could go home, go to college like her mother had wanted, live a normal life. No more pain, no more humiliation, no more feeling like she was letting everyone down. But then, in the darkness, she thought about the day she'd learned her father had died. She'd been in 7th grade, sitting in math class, when the principal had come to get her. She'd known immediately, from the look on his face, that something terrible had happened. Her mother had been waiting in the office, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. The funeral had been enormous. Hundreds of Marines in their dress blues, a 21-gun salute, the flag folded with precise, reverent movements and presented to her mother. Emily had watched it all in a state of numb shock, unable to process that her father, her hero, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with homework and made terrible dad jokes, was really gone. But what she remembered most clearly was the moment when the Marines who'd served with her father had approached her after the service. These tough, battle-hardened men had knelt down to her level, looked her in the eyes, and told her stories about her dad, how he'd been brave, how he'd been kind, how he'd sacrificed himself to save others. And then one of them, She couldn't remember his name now, had said something that stuck with her ever since. Your dad never quit, even when things got hard, even when it would have been easier to give up. That's what made him a Marine. Emily rolled onto her side, clutching her thin pillow. She couldn't quit, not because of pride, not because of stubbornness, but because quitting would mean all this suffering was for nothing. It would mean her father's legacy ended with his death, that she wasn't strong enough to carry it forward. She would find a way. Somehow, she would find a way to be enough. The breaking point came 2 days later during a particularly grueling combat training exercise. The platoon was learning hand-to-hand combat techniques, and they'd been paired off to practice. Emily had been matched with recruit Thompson, a former high school wrestler, who outweighed her by at least 70 pounds. The exercise was supposed to be controlled, practicing specific moves and counter-moves. But Thompson was frustrated. His girlfriend had sent him a Dear John letter that morning, and he was taking his anger out on the exercise. He moved too aggressively, too forcefully. When Emily attempted the defensive move they'd been taught, Thompson countered with more strength than necessary, and she went flying backward, landing hard on the ground with Thompson's full weight coming down on top of her. Pain exploded through Emily's shoulder, where she'd hit the ground. She heard something pop, felt something tear, and couldn't suppress the cry that escaped her lips. Thompson scrambled off her immediately, his face pale with shock, but the damage was done. The drill instructors were there in seconds. Staff Sergeant Morrison pulled Emily to her feet, his face impassive. "Can you move your arm, Parker?" Emily tried. The pain was excruciating, radiating from her shoulder down through her entire arm. She managed to lift it slightly, but couldn't raise it above shoulder height. Tears were streaming down her face, though she wasn't sure if they were from the physical pain or the emotional devastation of knowing what this meant. "Get to medical," Morrison ordered. Now. The diagnosis at the medical facility was a partial tear of her rotator cuff and severe shoulder strain. The Navy corpsman who examined her was sympathetic but blunt. "You're looking at several weeks of recovery, minimum. You'll have to be recycled to a new platoon once you're healed. Start training over from the beginning. Start over. 3 weeks of suffering, 3 weeks of pushing herself to the absolute limit, and it all meant nothing. She'd have to do it all again, would be weeks behind everyone she'd started with. The recruits who'd mocked her would graduate and become Marines while she was still struggling through the early weeks of training. Emily sat on the examination table, her injured arm in a sling, and felt the last of her resolve crumbling. Maybe this was the universe telling her to quit. Maybe this was a sign she'd been waiting for, that this path wasn't meant for her. Recruit Parker? A voice interrupted her spiraled despair. She looked up to see an older officer entering the medical bay. A colonel, she realized, noting the eagles on his collar. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 50s, with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Sir, yes, sir." Emily tried to stand at attention, but the movement made her shoulders scream in protest, and she swayed slightly. "At ease. Stay seated." The colonel approached, his expression unreadable. "I'm Colonel Harrison. I oversee 3rd Battalion. I heard one of my recruits was injured, wanted to check in personally." His eyes moved to her shoulder, then to her face, studying her with an intensity that made Emily uncomfortable. "How bad is it?" "Partial rotator cuff tear, sir. They said several weeks recovery." Harrison nodded slowly. "And then you'll be recycled. Start over with a new platoon." "Yes, sir." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. She couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't bear to see whatever judgment or disappointment was surely there. "That's a setback," Harrison said, "but not the end, unless you choose to make it the end." He paused, and something in his tone made Emily look up. The colonel was staring at her backpack, which the corpsman had set on the chair next to the examination table. More specifically, he was staring at the silver star medal hanging from the zipper. The silence stretched out, growing heavy. Harrison stepped closer to the backpack, reaching out as if to touch the medal, then stopping just short. His hand trembled slightly. Emily noticed. The colonel's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough, strained. "Where did you get this?" "Sir, it was my father's, sir." Captain James Parker. He died in Afghanistan, sir. 2017. Colonel Harrison's eyes snapped to her face, and Emily was shocked to see raw emotion there. Recognition, grief, something that looked almost like pain. James Parker, he repeated, the name seeming to cost him something to say. Jim Parker. He was your father. Yes, sir. Harrison closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were wet. Jim Parker saved my life, he said quietly. May 2017. Our convoy was ambushed outside Sangin. Your father... He stopped, swallowed hard. Your father pulled me out of burning vehicle while taking heavy fire. He was wounded in the process, shot twice, but he kept moving, kept fighting, got 3 other wounded Marines to safety before he let anyone treat his own injuries. He earned that Silver Star. He earned it with blood. Emily couldn't breathe. She'd known her father was a hero, had known the basics of what he'd done. But hearing it from someone who'd been there, someone whose life her father had saved, made it real in a way it had never been before. I should have died that day, Harrison continued, his voice thick with emotion. But Jim Parker decided I wasn't going to. He decided none of us were going to, and he made that decision reality through sheer force of will. The colonel's eyes met Emily's. He was one of the finest Marines I've ever served with, one of the finest men I've ever known. And you're his daughter. Yes, sir. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You look like him, he said finally. Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from her, a surprising gesture given their rank difference. Tell me the truth, Recruit Parker. Do you want to be here? Really want to be here? Or are you just trying to live up to some idea of your father? The question caught Emily off guard. She opened her mouth to give the expected answer, the brave answer, but something about Harrison's demeanor, the genuine curiosity and concern in his expression, made her pause and actually think about it. Both, sir, she finally answered. I want to honor my father's memory, but I also need to prove something to myself, that I'm not just his daughter, that I'm strong enough in my own right, that I could be someone he would have been proud of. Harrison nodded slowly. Your father would already be proud of you for trying, for getting this far, for not quitting even when everyone expected you to. He leaned forward. But I'm going to be honest with you, Parker. This isn't going to get easier. You're small, you're struggling physically, and you've got a long road ahead of you. Even without this injury, you were facing an uphill battle. With it, the odds are even worse. Each word was true, and each one hurt. Emily felt tears building again, felt the weight of her inadequacy crushing down on her. I know, sir. I'm not finished, Harrison said firmly. The odds are worse, but that doesn't mean impossible. Your father was underestimated, too. Did you know that? He was one of the smallest officers in his class at OCS. Some people thought he wouldn't make it, wouldn't be able to command the respect of larger, tougher Marines. But he proved them wrong, not by trying to be someone he wasn't, but by being the best version of himself, by being smart, determined, and by caring about his Marines more than he cared about his own glory. Harrison stood, and Emily automatically tried to stand too, wincing at the pain. The colonel waved her back down. You're going to recover from this injury, Parker. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And when you're cleared to return to training, I'm going to personally make sure you're placed somewhere you can succeed, not because of who your father was, but because I think you have potential that no one's bothered to help you develop. Emily stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Sir, Don't thank me yet, Harrison cut her off, because what I'm offering isn't easier. It's harder. I'm going to hold you to the same standard as every other recruit. Maybe higher, because I know what your father was capable of, and I believe the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But I'm also going to make sure you get the support you need to meet that standard. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Emily's voice was stronger now, steadier. Good. Harrison moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. Your father once told me that being a Marine wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about being willing to stand up when it mattered. Even when you were scared, even when the odds were against you. You got that in you, Parker. I can see it. The question is whether you can see it. After he left, Emily sat alone in the medical bay, her injured shoulder throbbing, her mind reeling. Everything had changed in the span of one conversation. The colonel, a man her father had saved, a man who knew her father as more than just a name on a medal, believed in her, believed she could do this. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Emily felt something other than fear and doubt. She felt hope, small, fragile, but real. She looked at her father's silver star, at the tarnished medal that represented so much courage and sacrifice, and made a silent promise. She would not quit. She would recover. She would return, and she would prove that James Parker's daughter was a Marine too. The 6 weeks of recovery were both the hardest and most transformative period of Emily's life. She was moved to the medical rehabilitation platoon, a limbo where injured recruits went to heal before either returning to training or being discharged. Some of the recruits, they were counting down the days until they could leave. Their injuries had given them an honorable way out, and they were taking it. But Emily attacked her rehabilitation with a fierce determination that surprised even her. Every morning, she attended physical therapy sessions where a Navy corpsman named Petty Officer Chin guided her through exercises designed to restore strength and mobility to her injured shoulder. The work was painful, tedious, and slow. Progress was measured in tiny increments. Being able to lift her arm an inch higher, being able to hold a light weight for 30 seconds longer. You're pushing too hard. Chin warned her one afternoon as Emily gritted her teeth through another set of resistance band exercises. Sweat poured down her face, and her shoulder was screaming in protest. You need to let the tissue heal properly or you'll just re-injure it. I need to get back to training. Emily managed through clenched teeth. Chin crossed his arms, watching her with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. You'll get back faster if you follow the protocol. Rushing it will only set you back further. He moved closer, adjusting her form slightly. Besides, strength isn't just about the shoulder. If you really want to succeed when you return, you need to work on overall conditioning. That conversation sparked an idea. Emily couldn't do upper body work beyond her prescribed therapy, but there was nothing stopping her from working on everything else. She began waking up at 0430, a full 30 minutes before she had to, and running. At first, she could barely manage a mile without stopping, her cardiovascular endurance depleted from weeks of inactivity. But she kept at it, adding distance gradually, pushing through the burning in her lungs and the leaden weight in her legs. She did core exercises in her room. Planks, sit-ups, leg raises, until her abdominal muscles shook with fatigue. She practiced the drill movements she'd learned, marching in place, perfecting her facing movements, ingraining the muscle memory so deeply that her body would know what to do even when her mind was overwhelmed. She studied the Marine Corps knowledge booklet every night, memorizing general orders, rank structure, Marine Corps history, all the academic components of training that she'd struggled with before when she was too exhausted to think straight. Colonel Harrison visited her twice during those 6 weeks. The first time was about 2 weeks into her recovery. He found her in the physical therapy room, struggling through an exercise that required her to lift a 2-pound weight above her head. It seemed pathetically light, but to Emily's damaged shoulder, it felt like a boulder. "Recruit Parker," Harrison said from the doorway, and Emily immediately tried to snap to attention, forgetting her injury. The pain that shot through her shoulder made her gasp, and Harrison quickly waved her back to ease. "As you were." He approached, watching as she resumed the exercise with shaking arms. "How's the recovery progressing?" "Ahead of schedule, sir," Emily replied, which was true. Chin had admitted grudgingly that she was healing faster than expected, likely due to her youth and the aggressive way she attacked her therapy. Harrison nodded, then gestured to a bench. "Sit. I want to talk to you about something." Once they were both seated, he continued, "I've been thinking about your situation, about how to set you up for success when you return to training. And I've come to a decision." Emily waited, her heart pounding. Was he going to tell her she wasn't worth the trouble? That despite what he'd said before, she should quit? "When you're medically cleared," Harrison said, "I'm going to assign you to a new platoon. One that's just starting training. But I'm also going to arrange for you to receive some additional support. There's a staff sergeant in my battalion, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. She's one of the finest Marines I've ever had the privilege of serving with, and she's expressed interest in mentoring you. Sir, I don't want special treatment. This isn't special treatment. Harrison cut her off firmly. This is giving you the tools you need to succeed. Every recruit gets instruction, Parker, but some recruits need more targeted guidance to overcome specific challenges. There's no shame in that. Your father knew when to ask for help, when to learn from those with more experience. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Emily absorbed this, then nodded. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Rodriguez is tough as nails. She's going to work you harder than anyone else. Expect more from you than anyone else. But if you're willing to put in the work, she'll help you become the Marine you want to be. Harrison stood to leave, then paused. Your father used to say that the measure of a Marine wasn't whether they got knocked down, but whether they got back up. You got knocked down, Parker. Now show me you can get back up. The second visit came during Emily's 5th week of recovery. She just finished a particularly grueling physical therapy session and was icing her shoulder when Harrison appeared, accompanied by a woman Emily didn't recognize. She was Hispanic, probably in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and a kind of lean, muscular build that spoke of years of serious training. The rockers on her chevrons identified her as a gunnery sergeant. Recruit Parker, this is Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. Harrison introduced them. Emily stood awkwardly, trying to figure out the proper protocol for greeting a senior enlisted Marine while in recovery status and wearing physical therapy clothes. Rodriguez solved the problem by extending her hand for a handshake. Firm, brief, professional. I've heard a lot about you, Rodriguez said, her dark eyes assessing Emily with the same intensity Harrison had shown. Colonel Harrison tells me you're Jim Parker's daughter. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. I never had the privilege of serving with your father, Rodriguez continued, but his reputation preceded him. He was known for being a Marine who led from the front, who never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and who had the respect of everyone who served under him. She paused. The colonel thinks you have the potential to be cut from the same cloth. I'm here to find out if he's right. Over the next week, Rodriguez visited Emily daily, sometimes observing her physical therapy, sometimes pulling her aside for conversations that were part interview, part counseling session, part Marine Corps education. She asked about Emily's motivations, her goals, her fears. She shared stories from her own career, how she'd grown up poor in East Los Angeles, how she joined the Marines to escape a bad situation, how she struggled at first, but found her place through determination and the guidance of mentors who saw her potential. Being a Marine isn't about being the biggest or the toughest, Rodriguez told Emily one afternoon as they walked the grounds of the rehabilitation facility. The weather was overcast, a cool breeze coming in from the ocean, carrying the smell of salt water. It's about heart. It's about refusing to quit when things get hard. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself. That's what I want, Emily said quietly. To be part of something that matters. To make a difference. Rodriguez nodded. Then you need to understand something crucial. When you go back to training, you're going to face the same challenges as before, probably worse, because you'll be starting over with recruits who don't know you, who will make the same judgments about your size and strength. But this time, you're going to approach it differently. How? By being smart, by using your head as much as your body. Rodriguez stopped walking, turned to face Emily directly. You're never going to be the biggest recruit. You're probably never going to be the fastest or the strongest, but you can be the smartest. You can be the most technically proficient. You can be the one who helps others, who leads by example, who shows that being a Marine is about more than just physical prowess. She pulled out a small notebook and pen, handing them to Emily. Starting now, you're going to keep a training journal. Every day, you're going to write down what you learned, what you struggled with, what you need to improve. You're going to analyze your performance like a scientist studying an experiment. And when you go back to training, you're going to use that analysis to work smarter, not just harder. Emily took the notebook, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It seemed like such a simple thing, but something about the gesture felt significant, like she was being given a tool that could change everything. I also want you to change how you think about your size, Rodriguez continued. Right now, you see it as a disadvantage, but it can be an advantage if you use it right. You're small, which means you're probably more agile than bigger recruits. You can move through tight spaces more easily. You use less energy to move your body weight, which means your endurance can actually be better if you train it right. Every characteristic has both strengths and weaknesses. Your job is to maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. The final week of recovery was marked by Emily's medical evaluation. Petty Officer Chin put her through a series of tests, measuring her range of motion, strength, and pain levels. She'd worked so hard for this moment, and the anxiety of potentially failing the evaluation made her nauseous. Range of motion is fully restored, Chin announced, making notes on his clipboard. Strength is at about 85% of normal, which is actually excellent for this stage of recovery. Pain. Minimal, Petty Officer. Only if I really push it. This was mostly true. There was still some discomfort, especially with overhead movements, but it was manageable. Chin studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'm clearing you to return to training. With some stipulations, you'll need to continue doing your therapy exercises daily, and if you experience any sharp pain or significant increase in discomfort, you report to medical immediately. Understood? Yes, Petty Officer. Emily couldn't keep the excitement and relief out of her voice. You've worked hard for this, Chin said, his professional demeanor softening slightly. Harder than most. I hope it works out for you. 2 days later, Emily reported to her new platoon, 4th Battalion, Fox Company, Platoon 4092. They were in their second week of training, still in the adjustment phase, still learning the basic routines and expectations. As Emily approached the squad bay with her seed bag, her repaired backpack with her father's medal hanging from it, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Fear, certainly. Fear that she'd fail again, that all her recovery work wouldn't be enough. But also determination, stronger and more focused than before. And something new, confidence. Not the brash, unearned confidence of someone who didn't know what they were facing, but the quiet, hard-won confidence of someone who'd been knocked down and gotten back up. The platoon senior drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Davis, was waiting for her. He was shorter than Morrison had been, more compact, with dark skin and intense brown eyes that missed nothing. Recruit Parker, welcome to Fox Company. I've been briefed on your situation. His voice was firm but not unkind. You're getting a fresh start here, but make no mistake. You'll be held to the same standards as everyone else. Higher, actually, because you're behind and need to catch up. Can you handle that? Sir, yes, sir. We'll see. Stow your gear and join the platoon for evening meal. Tomorrow morning, 0500, we'll assess where you are physically and academically, and we'll develop a plan to get you up to speed. That night, lying in a new rack surrounded by new recruits, Emily pulled out the journal Rodriguez had given her. On the first page, she wrote, Day 1, second chance. I will not waste this opportunity. I will work smarter and harder than before. I will prove that Emily Parker is worthy of being a Marine, worthy of carrying my father's legacy. I will not quit. I will not fail. I will become who I'm meant to be. She closed the journal and placed it carefully in her footlocker next to her father's medal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new chances to prove herself. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at boot camp, Emily fell asleep feeling ready to face whatever came next. The transformation had begun. The final 7 weeks of boot camp tested every aspect of Emily's transformation. From the moment she joined Platoon 4092, it was clear that this time would be different, not easier, but different. She approached every challenge with the calculated determination Rodriguez had taught her, using her head as much as her body, analyzing her performance, and constantly adapting. The physical training was still brutal. The obstacle course still made her muscles scream. The run still left her gasping. But now, Emily understood that she didn't have to be the fastest or the strongest. She just had to meet the standard and show constant improvement. She studied the obstacle course like it was a puzzle to be solved, finding the most efficient ways to use leverage and momentum to compensate for her lack of raw strength. She paced her run strategically, learning to maintain a steady rhythm rather than burning out early. Most importantly, she stopped viewing herself as an individual trying to survive and started seeing herself as part of a team. This shift in perspective changed everything. It began about 2 weeks after joining the new platoon. Recruit Davis, no relation to their drill instructor, was struggling with land navigation, unable to read the maps and compasses they'd need for the upcoming field exercise. Emily had always been good with spatial reasoning and had aced the navigation classes. She saw Davis hunched over his map during a free moment, frustration evident on his face. "Need help?" Emily asked quietly, approaching him. Davis looked up, surprised. Most recruits guarded their knowledge jealously, seeing other recruits as competition. "I just don't get it," he admitted. "The map makes sense until I try to relate it to the terrain, and then my brain gets all confused." Emily sat down next to him and pulled out her own map. For the next 30 minutes, she walked him through the concepts, explaining how to orient the map, how to identify terrain features, how to plot coordinates. By the end of the session, Davis was successfully completing practice problems he'd been stuck on for days. "Thanks, Parker," he said gratefully. "I thought I was going to fail this part for sure." "We're a team," Emily replied, something Rodriguez had drilled into her. "We succeed together." Word of Emily's helped spread quietly through platoon. Recruits began approaching her with questions about academic material, and she helped whenever she could. This wasn't special treatment or an unfair advantage. It was Marines helping Marines, the fundamental principle of their brotherhood. And slowly, attitudes toward her began to shift. The physical evolution continued as well. Rodriguez kept her promise to mentor Emily, showing up regularly to observe training and provide guidance. She taught Emily proper breathing techniques for the runs, showed her how to optimize her form on the obstacle course, helped her develop a strength training routine that worked with her body type rather than against it. "You're never going to bench press as much as Recruit Thompson," Rodriguez told her one afternoon as they watched the platoon during weight training. "But you can develop your core strength, your grip strength, your endurance. Play to your advantages." Emily also discovered that being small wasn't always a disadvantage. During combat training, her smaller size and lower center of gravity made certain techniques easier for her than for larger recruits. She could slip out of holds more easily, could use an opponent's momentum against them more effectively. Staff Sergeant Davis noticed this and occasionally used her to demonstrate techniques, which earned her a measure of respect from the other recruits. But the real test came during the Crucible, the final 54-hour field exercise that would determine whether they earned the title of Marine. It was a combination of everything they'd learned: long marches with heavy packs, obstacle courses, problem-solving exercises, combat scenarios, all while sleep-deprived and operating on minimal food. Recruits worked in squads, and success depended on teamwork, leadership, and sheer determination. The Crucible began before dawn on a cold, misty morning. The platoon marched out in full gear, each recruit carrying a pack that seemed to weigh as much as they did. Emily felt the familiar weight settling onto her shoulders, felt the straps digging in, felt her body already protesting the discomfort. But she'd trained for this, prepared for this. She could do this. The first major challenge was a 6-mile hike to the training area. In her first attempt at boot camp, Emily would have struggled just to keep up. But now, she'd learned to find a rhythm, to manage the weight distribution, to control her breathing. She stayed with the main body of recruits, not at the front, but not at the back either. Solid middle of the pack. Acceptable. Competent. When they reached the training area, they were divided into squads for a series of problem-solving exercises. Emily found herself in Squad 2, led by Recruit Thomas, a natural leader type who'd been chosen as one of platoon squad leaders. Their first challenge was to get their entire squad and their equipment over a 12-foot wall, using only the resources provided, a few short ropes and some wooden planks. Thomas quickly organized the squad, but his first approach wasn't working. The planks weren't long enough to make a stable ramp, and trying to boost people up one by one was taking too much time. Emily studied the problem, her engineering-minded brain working through possibilities. She saw a solution but hesitated. unsure if she should speak up. Then Rodriguez's words echoed in her mind. Leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about stepping up when you see something that needs to be done. Thomas, Emily spoke up, what if we use the planks as a frame and loop the ropes through them? We could create a more stable climbing structure. Thomas looked at her, considered the suggestion, then nodded. Show me. Emily demonstrated her idea, and within minutes, they constructed a stable climbing frame. The squad made it over the wall with time to spare, and Thomas clapped Emily on the shoulder. Good thinking, Parker. The challenges kept coming, each one testing different aspects of their training. A night navigation course where Emily's map skills proved invaluable. A casualty evacuation scenario where they had to carry a simulated wounded Marine over rough terrain. Emily couldn't carry the casualty alone, but she coordinated with others to ensure efficient rotations so no one got too exhausted. A combat scenario where her small size allowed her to provide effective covering fire from tight positions. But the moment that truly defined Emily's crucible came during the second night, about 36 hours into the exercise. They were doing another long march, this one uphill, in the dark, with everyone beyond exhausted. Emily's shoulder was aching, not the sharp pain that would indicate rain injury, but the deep, grinding discomfort of muscle fatigue. Her feet were blistered. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Around her, she could hear other recruits struggling too, the sounds of labored breathing and occasional stumbles on the rough terrain. Ahead of her, Recruit Martinez, the same recruit who questioned whether Emily should even be there, suddenly stumbled and fell. Her pack shifted awkwardly, and Emily heard a sharp gasp of pain. The formation slowed but didn't stop. They couldn't stop unless someone was seriously injured. Emily moved up beside Martinez, who was struggling to get back to her feet. You okay? Emily asked quietly. Twisted my ankle, Martinez gritted out. It's fine. I can walk it off. But as Martinez tried to put weight on the ankle, she nearly fell again. It wasn't fine. Emily made a quick decision. She'd been carrying a few extra items in her pack, things she thought she might need but hadn't used. She quickly redistributed them, then reached for Martinez's pack. What are you doing? Martinez asked, redistributing weight. Give me some of your heavier items. Parker, you can barely carry your own pack. I've got this. Come on, we're falling behind. Martinez hesitated, then pulled out some of her heavier gear, a water can, extra ammunition pouches for the simulated combat scenarios. Emily added them to her own pack, feeling the weight settle onto her already tired shoulders like a physical blow. It was almost more than she could handle. Almost. Can you walk? Emily asked. Martinez tested the ankle, wincing. Yeah, slowly. Then let's move. They continued up the hill, Martinez limping, Emily struggling under the increased weight. Every step was a test of will. Emily's legs shook, her breathing became ragged, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. But she kept moving. One step, then another, then another. She focused on nothing but the next step, the next breath, the next moment of not quitting. Staff Sergeant Davis dropped back to check on them. Emily braced herself for a reprimand, for being told she was slowing down the formation. But Davis just looked at her struggling form, at Martinez's injury, and at the determination on both their faces. Carry on, was all he said, but there was something in his voice, approval, maybe even respect. They made it to the top of the hill. Emily carefully redistributed the gear back to Martinez, whose ankle had stabilized enough for her to carry her own weight again. As Emily adjusted her own pack, Martinez caught her arm. Thank you, she said quietly. I was wrong about you. Back at the beginning. I thought you were just dead weight. But you're stronger than most of us. Not physically, but where it counts. Emily didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded, too exhausted for words, and they continued with the exercise. The final event of the Crucible was the 9-mile hike back to base, followed by the emblem ceremony where they would be presented with their eagle, globe, and anchor, the symbol that they had earned the title of Marine. Emily began the hike in a state of transcendent exhaustion, her body operating on autopilot, her mind floating somewhere between consciousness and dreams. But as they marched, something strange happened. The sun began to rise, painting the California hills in shades of gold and pink. The cool morning air was crisp and clean, and Emily realized she was going to make it. After everything, the mockery, the injury, the setbacks, the pain, she was actually going to make it. Not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she had refused to quit, because she had gotten back up every time she'd been knocked down, because she had learned and adapted and grown. Tears streamed down her face as she marched, but she didn't bother wiping them away. They were tears of exhaustion, yes, but also of triumph, of relief, a profound gratitude for everyone who had helped her reach this moment. When they finally reached the depot and formed up for the emblem ceremony, Emily stood at attention, her body swaying slightly with fatigue, but her spine straight. Colonel Harrison was there to oversee the ceremony, along with the battalion's commanding officer and several other senior Marines. Rodriguez stood off to the side, her face impassive but her eyes proud. "Recruits," Harrison's voice rang out over the formation. "You have completed the crucible. You've been tested, and you have not been found wanting. You are no longer recruits. From this moment forward, you are Marines." One by one, they approached to receive their emblems. When Emily's name was called, she marched forward, her steps sure despite her exhaustion. Harrison himself pinned the eagle, globe, and anchor onto her collar, his eyes meeting hers with unmistakable pride. "Your father would be proud, Marine," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "As am I." "Thank you, sir," Emily managed, her voice thick with emotion. After the ceremony, as the new Marines, Emily still couldn't quite believe she could call herself that, celebrated and began the process of graduation preparation. Colonel Harrison pulled Emily aside once more. They stood in the shadow of one of the battalion buildings, away from the celebrations. "I want you to know something," Harrison said. "What you accomplished here wasn't just about physical strength or endurance. It was about character. It was about refusing to let others define your limitations. It was about being the kind of Marine your father was. The kind who leads by example, who helps others, who never quits even when quitting would be easier." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, holding out to Emily. It was a patch, worn and faded, with the insignia of her father's unit from Afghanistan. "I've been carrying this since 2017, Harrison explained. "It was Jim's. After the ambush, after he pulled me out of that burning vehicle, I found it on the ground. I kept it, intending to return it to his family someday. But I think he'd want you to have it now, to remind you that you're carrying on his legacy in the best possible way." Emily took the patch with trembling hands, holding it gently as if it might disintegrate. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep being the Marine you've proven yourself to be. Keep helping others. Keep pushing yourself. Keep making your father proud." Harrison's expression softened. "You know, Jim once told me that he hoped his daughter would grow up to be strong, brave, and kind. I think he got his wish." That evening, as Emily packed her belongings in preparation for Marine combat training, and then her first duty station, she carefully attached her father's unit patch to her bag next to his Silver Star medal. She thought about how far she'd come from that terrified girl who'd stepped off the bus weeks ago. She thought about all the people who'd help her along the way. Colonel Harrison, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, Petty Officer Chen, even her fellow Marines who'd eventually accepted her not despite her struggles, but because of how she'd overcome them. She pulled out her training journal, now filled with entries documenting her entire journey, and wrote one final note. "Graduation day. I am a United States Marine. Not because I was the strongest or the fastest, but because I refused to quit. I learned that strength comes in many forms, that leadership is about lifting others up, and that the only true failure is giving up. Dad, I hope I made you proud. I'll carry your memory and the lessons you taught me into everything I do from here forward. Semper Fi." The next morning, as the newly minted Marine prepared to leave the depot, Emily stood at attention in her dress blues for the graduation ceremony. The uniform still felt strange, too formal, too significant. But as she looked around at her fellow Marines, at the drill instructors who'd pushed them all to their limits, at Colonel Harrison and Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez standing at attention on the reviewing stand. She felt a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer just a scared little recruit. She was no longer defined by her size or her struggles. She was a Marine, forged through fire and determination, carrying forward the legacy of all who'd worn the uniform before her. The ceremony concluded with the playing of the Marines' hymn. As the familiar words rang out across the parade deck, Emily stood tall, her hand in a perfect salute, her father's silver star catching the California sunlight where it hung proudly on her uniform. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every moment of pain and doubt had been worth it. She had earned this. She had earned the title, and she would spend the rest of her life proving worthy of it.